I sit cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by tenant maintenance requests. Mrs. Thompson needs her leaky faucet fixed before the weekend. The Millers on the third floor reported their heater making strange noises. Mr. Rodriguez wants permission to install a ceiling fan. This is my Friday night, sorting through the small problems of others while sipping lukewarm coffee. The doorbell rings. I glance at my watch. 7:15 p.m. Nobody visits without calling first, especially not on a Friday. When I open the door, my sister Victoria stands there with a smile that doesn't touch her eyes. Her camel-colored coat probably costs more than 3 months of my rent. "Amanda," she says, voice bright and brittle like breaking glass. "May I come in?" Before I can answer, she brushes past me into my apartment, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors. She surveys my living room, the stack of maintenance requests, the half-empty coffee mug, the couch with the throw blanket Grandma Margaret crocheted for me years ago. "Working on a Friday night, you always were the dedicated one," she says, but the words sound more like an accusation than a compliment. She pulls an envelope from her leather portfolio. "I came to deliver this personally, as a courtesy." The paper feels unusually heavy in my hands. I open it and scan the contents, my eyes catching on numbers that can't possibly bright. "This is a rent increase notice," I say, "from $2,350 to $7,100. You can't be serious. I've lived here 5 years. Fair market value. Little sister. Business is business." Victoria adjusts her watch, a gleaming gold Cartier that catches the light. "The family voted last weekend. We're repositioning all the properties for maximum return." My mind "Last weekend, at Mom and Dad's. You should come to more family gatherings," she says with a shrug. Important decisions get made. The memory surfaces like a drowning victim. 14 relatives seated around my parents' dining room table. Everyone's eyes had slid away from mine when I mentioned Brookside Residences. Mom had changed the subject while Dad refilled wine glasses. My cousins had exchanged knowing glances. They had already decided. They had already known. My pulse quickens. Mouth suddenly dessert dry. My hands tremble slightly as I refold the notice. When they let her crush me in silence, they never imagined that silence would become a me weapon, I think. The words forming somewhere deep in my mind where fear hasn't reached yet. "You can't be serious." I repeat, voice steadier than I feel. "I've managed this building since Grandma Margaret died. I've kept the tenants happy, handled repairs, and collected rent, for which the family has compensated you," Victoria counters. But sentiment doesn't pay dividends. An old memory surfaces. Christmas morning when I was 10, Victoria unwrapped a pearl necklace while I received a clearance rack sweater from the discount store. My parents beaming at her, barely glancing at me. "Your sister knows what she wants in life," they'd explained later. "She's looking out for the family's interests." Grandma Margaret had pulled me aside that same day. "Your sister seeks power," she whispered, patting my hand. "You seek connection. Remember which one builds a legacy." I study Victoria now. Her expensive watch, her manicured nails, the subtle logo on her portfolio that matches the one on her law firm's letterhead. The timing suddenly clicks in my analytical brain. 3 weeks after her firm lost the Greenfield case. 2 months after she purchased that new house in Willow Creek. Part of me wants to beg, to remind her of 4 shared childhood. Another part knows it would be pointless. "I'll need to review this with my attorney before responding," I say, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Victoria laughs, the sound sharp enough to cut. "What attorney would waste time on this? The building's legally mine. The transfer papers were signed last month." My stomach plummets. This isn't just about my apartment. It's about my home, my dignity, my last connection to Grandma Margaret. It's about Mrs. Jenkins in to-be, who lives on Social Security and bakes cookies for everyone at Christmas. It's about Mr. Thompson, who's been here 40 years and knows every creaking floorboard by name. "Mom and Dad know about this?" I ask, though I already know the answer. "Of course," Victoria says, checking her watch. "Your sister manages all the family assets." She mimics our father's authoritative tone. She knows what she's doing. The smile that spreads across her face isn't about money. It's about winning, about finally moving me completely from Grandma Margaret's legacy. My phone buzzes. A text message from Mrs. Jenkins. "Come down for tea. Dear, you look upset." I saw Victoria arrive. The old woman has lived in the building for 40 years. She was Grandma Margaret's best friend, long before she became mine. She sees everything from her window overlooking the front entrance. Victoria notices the message. "The tenants aren't your concern anymore," she says, gathering her portfolio. I'll handle communications going forward. Mrs. Jenkins has lived here since before we were born. I say, grandfather clauses are for sentimental fools, Victoria replies. The market doesn't care about Christmas. Cookies and rent that's decades below value. Grandfather. Mrs. Jenkins appears in my doorway, her silver hair neatly pinned back, wearing her usual cardigan and sensible shoes. She carries her favorite teapot on a small tray. I thought we could use some chamomile, she says, not waiting for an invitation, tonter. At 70, she's earned the right to ignore certain social norms. Victoria's dismissive glance bounces off the older woman like rain off a windshield. Mrs. Jenkins. Victoria says with practiced politeness, we were just discussing some business matters. I heard, Mrs. Jenkins says, setting down her tea tray. She straightens her spine to her full 5 feet to height. I knew your grandmother for 50 years, Victoria. What would Margaret say about this? For a moment, Victoria's perfect mask slips. Then she recovers, smooths her coat, and heads for the door. 30 days notice, Amanda, it's all perfectly legal. When the door closes behind her, Mrs. Jenkins pours tea into 2 cups with some battles need preparation, not immediate confrontation, she says, handing me a steaming cup. Margaret faced vultures like this her whole life. She taught me how to handle them. Censure, the chamomile's gentle aroma grounds me, slowing my racing heart. A thought forms, crystallizing from the fog of shock and anger. I need to check Grandma's old papers, I say. Mrs. Jenkins smiles. I was hoping you'd say that. I stare at the cardboard box on my living room floor, throat tight with a mix of grief and anticipation. 2 days after Victoria's bombshell, I finally gathered the courage to retrieve Grandma Margaret's financial records from my storage unit. Dust motes dance in the sunbeam cutting across the room as I lift the first folder. The pages inside tell a story I never imagined. Bank statements, property deeds, email printouts. Each document reveals another piece of Victoria's systematic dismantling of Margaret's legacy. An email from Victoria to a luxury development firm catches my eye. Once we secure full control of Brookside, we can begin converting to high-end condos. Initial estimates suggest 300% return on investment within 18 months. My hands shake. The date on the email. 2 weeks after Margaret's funeral. Another folder contains minutes from a family trust meeting 6 years ago. Victoria had convinced our parents to sell the lake house. The one Margaret had specifically mentioned wanting me to have someday. Market conditions favor immediate liquidation, Victoria had argued. My parents had agreed without hesitation. For the family's financial security, Dad had said when I questioned the decision. The same justification echoes through document after document. The small inheritance my cousin James received. Instead of the antique shop, Margaret promised him. The vacation property in Vermont that disappeared into family investments. Victoria controlled. The retirement fund. Contributions for longtime family employees that were restructured into campaign. Under Victoria's supervision, Mrs. Jenkins knocks softly before entering. With a tray of sandwiches and tea, her eyes widen. At the papers surrounding me, I found rental increase notices for all the senior tenants. I say, voice hollow. She's targeting everyone, not just me. Mr. Thompson's would jump to $5,800, Mrs. Daniels to $6,450. You don't worry about me, Mrs. Jenkins says, setting down the tray. What else have you found? I hold up a handwritten note in Margaret's distinctive script. Brookside must remain in the family. The legacy must be protected. The paper feels warm in my hands, like a message from beyond. She knew, I whisper. She knew what Victoria would try to do. While Mrs. Jenkins pours tea, I continue sorting through the folders. A pattern emerges. Victoria, positioning herself since before Margaret's illness. Small transfers. Legal document revisions. Quiet consolidation of authority while everyone looked the other way. Your grandmother was no fool, Mrs. Jenkins says, handing me a steaming cup. She watched Victoria for years. The realization hits me like a physical blow. Margaret wasn't just being kind when she asked me to help with her financial records during her final months. She was preparing me, training me. The weekends spent reviewing property maintenance costs. The afternoons learning about tax assessments. She was arming me for this moment. I slump back against the couch, worldview tilting on its axis. My parents never saw me as Victoria's equal, did they? Mrs. Jenkins, silence is answer enough. Every family gathering now plays differently in my memory. The Christmas dinners where my law school application was dismissed while Victoria's firm partnership made the toast. The summer barbecues where my property management certification warranted a nod while Victoria's Millist Court victory earned champagne. The Thanksgiving when I announced my promotion to building manager and Mom quickly changed these object to Victoria's new Mercedes. I've been so blind, I whisper. Not blind, Mrs. Jenkins corrects, just trusting. There's a difference. I sit up straighter, methodically sorting the papers into new piles. No longer chronological but evidence of financial misconduct, documentation of tenant mistreatment, records of property ownership and transfer. She always waits until people are vulnerable, I say, recognizing the pattern in Victoria's timing. She struck after Margaret's death, after James' divorce, after the Thompsons' medical bills. Mrs. Jenkins nods. Predators target the wounded, but being a lawyer doesn't make her invincible. I continue, thoughts crystallizing. It just means I need to be more prepared. The phone rings, and Victoria's name flashes on the screen. I answer on speaker. You have a week to decide, she says without preamble. I'm being generous and giving you notice at all. The market won't wait. I'll need more time to review everything, I reply, voice steadier than I feel. There's nothing to review, she snaps. The decision is made. Mom and Dad agree. Almost on cue. My phone buzzes with a text from my mother. Your sister has carried this family financially for years. We owe her. After ending the call, I notice a legal brief in one of the folders. A high-profile case Victoria's firm lost last month. Another folder contains bank notices showing mortgage extension. Requests on Victoria's new house in Willow Creek. Credit card statements revealing mounting balances. Partnership meeting minutes noting pressure to bring in more revenue. This isn't just greed, I realize aloud. She's desperate. Mrs. Jenkins peers at the documents, which makes her dangerous. A final text from my father confirms my suspicions. Family gathering next Sunday to finalize arrangements. Be there. A week, I murmur. She's giving me a week before the guillotine falls. Mrs. Jenkins stands suddenly. You need Richard Harlan. Who? Margaret's attorney. Not the family firm, her personal lawyer. Mrs. Jenkins reaches for her phone. He retired last year, but he still consults. Margaret always said he was the only attorney she trusted completely. While Mrs. Jenkins makes the call, I continue organizing the documents. The financial records show years of transactions. Statements from long-term tenants about promises Margaret made regarding their housing security. Maintenance records I've kept meticulously since taking over management. By the time Mrs. Jenkins returns, I've filled 3 separate boxes with organized evidence. Richard will see us tomorrow morning, she announces. He says he's been expecting our call. Expecting it, I echo. Mrs. Jenkins points to a sealed envelope I haven't opened yet. The handwriting on the front reads, "For Amanda, when the time comes." With trembling fingers, I break the seal and unfold a single sheet of paper in Margaret's handwriting. When the time comes, Richard has everything you need. Remember what I told you. Your sister seeks power. You seek connection, and connection will always outlast power. For the first time in 3 days, I feel something beyond shock and anger. A quiet certainty settles in my chest. This isn't about feelings anymore, I say, closing the file folder. It's about facts. Mrs. Jenkins smiles, a fierce gleam in her eyes. Margaret would be proud. Tomorrow, we meet Richard Harlan. Tomorrow, we will begin to fight back. On Monday afternoon, I sit in Richard Harlan's wood-paneled office, staring at documents spread across his mahogany desk. Afternoon light slants through Venetian blinds, casting prison bar shadows across papers that just transformed my entire understanding of the last 3 years. Say it again, I whisper, my fingers tracing the embossed seal on what appears to be a deed. Harlan adjusts his wire-rimmed glasses. His weathered face, kind but serious. Your grandmother left you $920,000 in a private trust 3 years ago. With that money, you formed Riverbrook Properties LLC with my assistance. Of course, Riverbrook then purchased Brookside Residences from the family trust. I pick up the mortgage papers, my signature staring back at me. The memory surfaces hazily. Grandma Margaret asking me to sign some contingency paperwork while she was still lucid. I'd trusted her completely, never questioning why. But Victoria has been collecting rent, handling everything for years. She acts like she owns the building. Harlan's eyes twinkle, with something between amusement and vindication. Ms. Wells never bothered to verify the ownership transfer. After your grandmother's, she simply assumed control. The realization washes over me in waves. So all this time I've been the actual owner. Precisely, your grandmother made you manager of Riverbrook Properties. You've legally owned Brookside Residences for 3 years, while your sister has merely been an unauthorized property manager. A laugh bubbles up from somewhere deep inside me, surprising us both. Grandma Margaret planned this all along. She was quite strategic, Harlan says, sliding a sealed envelope toward me. Margaret left this for when the time came. 2. The envelope contains a single sheet of paper with Grandma's elegant handwriting. Don't chase her approval. Build your own ground. My heart pounds against my ribs as understanding crystallizes. This isn't just ammunition. It's a foundation. Victoria scheduled a family meeting for Sunday evening. I say, gathering the documents. She's planning to evict tenants for being late on rent. Harlan checks his watch. Then I believe we have a meeting to attend. The week passed in preparing for the confrontation. With the right support, I will protect my grandma's but now my legacy. On Sunday, the dining room of my parents' Tudor-style home feels suffocating. 14 relatives sit around the glossy table that has witnessed decades of family announcements, celebrations, and betrayals. Crystal glasses catch light from the chandelier, while mother's prized silver serving dishes gleam on the sideboard. Victoria stands at the head of the table, legal documents arranged before her like weapons. Her camel blazer matches her professional demeanor as she addresses the attentive family. Mother and father sit to her right, nodding in agreement at everything their golden child says. As I was explaining, Victoria continues, Tenant 3B, Mrs. Thompson, is 3 days late on rent again. I've prepared an eviction notice. She holds up the document like a trophy. Business is business. Mrs. Jenkins sits beside me, a guest I insisted on bringing. Her presence makes my parents uncomfortable. They know she sees through their polished veneer to the rot beneath. I've reviewed Brookside's financial records. Victoria adds, we're bleeding money on maintenance for these outdated units. Once we clear out the problematic tenants, we can begin upgrading to attract a more reliable clientele. My mother nods sympathetically. It must be difficult making these hard decisions. Darling, for years I would have shrunk in my chair, swallowing objections like bitter pills. But something has shifted inside me. Knowledge replacing uncertainty. Strength displacing fear. Actually, I say, my voice clearer than I expected. I've reviewed the records with my attorney. The room falls silent. Victoria's smile freezes on her face. What attorney? The doorbell chimes. Perfect timing. Orchestrated by Mrs. Jenkins' text message sent under My father frowns, excusing himself to answer. When he returns, Richard Harlan follows behind. A leather portfolio tucked under his arm. Recognition flashes in my mother's eyes. She knows exactly who he island. This is Richard Harlan. I announce, legal counsel for Riverbrook Properties, LLC. Victoria's smile vanishes completely. What's going on, Amanda? Harlan places his portfolio on the table, extracting documents with methodical precision. I represent Miss Wells, in her capacity as owner and manager of Riverbrook Properties, which purchased Brookside Residences 3 years ago from the family trust. The room erupts in confused murmurs. My father's face reddens while my mother's pales to the color of her bone china. That's impossible, Victoria stammers, her manicured hands gripping the table edge. I would know if the building had been sold. Harlan slides the deed across the polished wood. Everything was executed legally. Your grandmother ensured all appropriate filings were made with the county recorder's office. This can't be legal. Victoria insists, voice rising. Mother would never. Grandma Margaret made sure I could protect what matters. I interrupt, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. The building, the tenants, her legacy. My cousin Emily studies the documents, her accounting background allowing her to grasp the situation quickly. These look legitimate. Amanda owns Brookside through an LLC, which means, Harlan adds calmly, that any eviction notices or rent increases would require Ms. Wells' authorization as the legal owner. Victoria sinks into her chair, perfectly tailored jacket suddenly seeming too large for her frame. Her control over me, over the building, over the narrative, visibly crumbles. My father clears his throat. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Harlan replies. Just careful planning by Margaret Wells to ensure her wishes were respected. The family gathering dissolves into chaos. My aunts whispering urgently, uncles checking phones as if answers might appear there. Cousins reassessing family alliances in real time. Through it all, Victoria sits motionless, her legal training already calculating counterattacks. As we drive away later, Mrs. Jenkins squeezes my hand, her eyes bright with Margaret would be so proud. She always said you had steel in your spine. You just needed to discover it yourself. Back at Brookside, tenants gather in the lobby when word spreads. Mr. Rodriguez from 4A brings his homemade sangria. The Millers arrive with a casserole still warm from their oven. Even the quiet Mr. Hayes from the corner apartment joins us. Is it true? Mrs. Thompson asks, her arthritis-gnarled hands clutching mine. You own the building now. I've owned it for 3 years, I explain, still getting used to the words myself. I just didn't know. Their relief is palpable. Years of uncertainty lifting from stooped shoulders and worried faces. Victoria told me last month they were converting to luxury condos. Mrs. Miller confides. Said we should start looking for other arrangements. Mr. Rodriguez nods. She denied my maintenance requests 3 times and said the building wasn't worth investing in. One by one, they share stories of Victoria's calculated neglect, her subtle intimidation, her dismissive attitude toward their concerns. Each revelation strengthens my resolve. Harlan observes quietly from the sidelines, sipping Mr. Rodriguez's sangria. When the gathering begins to disperse, he approaches me. This is just the beginning, he says. Margaret left you more than you know. I watch my neighbors return to their apartments, not just tenants, but a community grandma Margaret spent decades building. For the first time, I understand what she meant about connection being more valuable than power. But as satisfaction settles over me, a nagging thought emerges. Victoria won't surrender without a fight. She's calculating her next move even now, probably on the phone with her law firm colleagues. Do I push for everything now, riding this wave of victory? Or do I prepare for the inevitable counterattack? Mrs. Jenkins seems to read my thoughts. Don't rush, she advises. Margaret taught me that the best victories come from patience. Tonight was just the opening move. I nod, understanding completely. What happened tonight wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. I sit at Harlan's antique mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of meticulously organized documents. 3 days have passed since I revealed my ownership of Brookside Residences. Watching shock transform Victoria's usually composed features, the memory brings a flicker of satisfaction, but I push it away. That momentary victory means nothing if I can't secure permanent protection for my tenants. We need to analyze every potential legal challenge Victoria might mount. Harlan says, sliding Ganather folder toward me. Your sister isn't just an attorney, she's a strategic thinker who won't accept defeat. Easily my fingers trace the embossed LLC stamp on Riverbrook Properties Incorporation papers. I keep expecting to feel more triumphant, I admit, but all I can think about is what comes next. Harlan's gray eyebrows lift slightly. That's exactly the right instinct, Amanda. Complacency is how people lose what they've rightfully gained. I spend hours examining property management regulations and LLC statutes. Taking careful notes in Grandma, Margaret's leather-bound journal. The familiar scent of its pages grounds me as I map out Victoria's potential countermoves. Each time my mind wanders toward celebration, I redirect it toward preparation. Look at this, I say, pushing a financial statement across the desk. Victoria has been collecting rent under Brookside management for the past 3 years. Even Thoth property legally belongs to Riverbrook Properties. Harlan adjusts his reading glasses. That's not just misleading, it's potentially fraudulent. I open my laptop and create a spreadsheet to track every maintenance request that went unfulfilled during Victoria's management. Each ignored leak, each postponed repair, becomes a data point in a pattern of neglect that undermined the building's value while maximizing short-term profit. I'm not doing this for revenge, I tell Harlan, though part of me wonders if that's entirely true. I'm doing it because I need to understand exactly what she's done to protect myself from what she might do next. Treat this like a business strategy, not family drama, Harlan advises. Your grandmother knew the difference, and it served her well. The next morning, Mrs. Jenkins arrives at my apartment with a thick manila folder. Her silver hair catches the light as she hands it to me with a steady grip that belies her. 70 years. 15 signed statements from tenants. She announces, documenting maintenance requests that were never addressed, rent increases without proper notice, and Victoria's dismissive treatment when they called with concerns. I add these to our growing evidence collection. Did anyone refuse to provide a statement? Only the Harrisons and 3C, she says. They're afraid of retaliation. We'll protect them either way, I promise. That afternoon, I walk through the building with my phone, photographing water damage in the laundry room ceiling, cracked tiles in the lobby, and the rusty pipes in the basement that should have been replaced years ago. Each image documents Victoria's neglect while she collected maintenance fees that never went toward actual Maintenance. Back in my apartment, I pore over financial records that reveal a pattern more disturbing than simple neglect. Maintenance funds from Brookside residences had been systematically diverted to an account labeled management overhead. The transactions, meticulously documented in Margaret's records, show nearly $83,000. That should have gone toward building improvements but instead disappeared into Victoria's personal expenses. The doorbell interrupts my analysis. When I open it, my parents stand in the hallway. Their expressions a familiar blend of disappointment and concern that instantly transports me back to childhood. "You're tearing this family apart," my mother says, stepping inside without waiting for uninvitation. Her pearl earrings catch the light as she surveys my document-covered dining table, with "Victoria has always protected us all." My father nods, hands in his pockets. "Your sister says you're threatening legal action now. Is that true?" The realization hits me like cold water. Victoria has been working on them, spinning a narrative where I'm the villain, threatening family harmony, rather than the victim protecting what's mine. Did she mention that she diverted over $80,000 of maintenance funds for her personal use? I ask quietly. My mother's gaze slides away. "Business is complicated, Amanda. Victoria understands these things better than I do." I finish for her. "That's what you've always believed, isn't it? No matter what evidence is right in front of you." Something tightens in my chest. The understanding that my parents may never see the truth, may never acknowledge that their golden child has systematically exploited everyone around her, including them, after they leave with promises to talk sense into me. I return to my spreadsheets with renewed determination. Losing my family's approval hurts, but not nearly as much as surrendering to Victoria's manipulation would. Truth matters more than approval. I whisper to myself, Margaret's words from years ago, finally making perfect sense. I organize another file of evidence, preparing for the battle I now understand is inevitable. The following morning, I sit at Harlan's desk, methodically arranging folders into 3 presses. The left contains financial records showing Victoria's suspicious transfers. The center holds tenant statements documenting neglected maintenance requests. The right displays ownership documents proving my control of Brookside residences through Riverbrook Properties, LLC. "How are we looking?" Harlan asks, entering with 2 steaming mugs. The aroma of dark roast coffee fills the wood-paneled office. "Everything's in place," I say, accepting the mug with a nod. "Tenant notices prepared, financial records secured, building improvement plans drafted." My voice sounds steadier than it did a week ago. When Victoria first appeared at my door with that envelope, Harlan settles into his leather chair, the material creaking beneath his weight. "Your grandmother would approve. This isn't just about keeping an apartment building, Amanda. It's about honoring a legacy." I run my finger along the edge of Margaret's handwritten notes. Her elegant script details every precaution she took to protect what mattered to her. "Victoria thinks this is about money. It never was. That's her fundamental mistake," Harlan says, tapping a pen against his legal pad. "She can't fight what she doesn't understand." The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the office as we work. Mrs. Jenkins calls twice to report her progress organizing the tenant meeting. Mr. Thompson offers to testify about how I personally fixed his bathroom, plumbing when Victoria fest to send a contractor. Even the Millers from the 3rd floor provide written statements about mysterious management fees that appeared on their rent statements after Victoria took over. "We're preparing for war, not just another skirmish," I tell Harlan as we catalog each piece of evidence. The methodical work calms me. Each document represents another brick in the foundation of our defense. My phone buzzes. Mrs. Jenkins. Her name on the screen makes me smile, until I read her message. "Someone from your sister's law firm just served me papers, claiming I'm violating building policy by organizing tenant meetings." The coffee turns bitter in my mouth. Victoria's targeting Mrs. Jenkins now. Harlan reads the message over my shoulder, his eyebrows drawing together. A classic intimidation tactic. Target the support system to isolate the primary opponent. My hands clench into fists. I should confront Victoria now. This crosses a line. That's exactly what she wants, Harlan warns. Every premature confrontation gives her information about your strategy. Patience. I paced the length of his office, my boots thumping against the hardwood. Mrs. Jenkins is 70 years old. She shouldn't have to deal with legal harassment. The phone rings again. Mrs. Jenkins, this time. I answer immediately. "Don't worry about those papers, dear," she says before I can speak. Her voice carries the calm wisdom of someone who has weathered many storms. Margaret faced worse from developers trying to buy her out in the 80s. But you shouldn't have to. She wants you to react emotionally. Mrs. Jenkins interrupts. Don't give her that satisfaction. I've lived through worse than a strongly worded letter from a law firm. I close my eyes, drawing a deep breath. What do you need from me? Nothing yet. Just stick to the plan. Margaret knew this day would come. She prepared you for it. Final. After hanging up, I turned to find Harlan watching me with something like approval in his eyes. Your sister's making a critical mistake, he says. She thinks this is about property. You understand it's about people. We spend the rest of the afternoon adapting our strategy. If Victoria is willing to target Mrs. Jenkins, she might go after other vulnerable tenants. We draft protective measures for everyone in the building, particularly the elderly and those on fixed incomes. When the streetlights flicker outside Harlan's window, we finally stop. My back aches from hours hunched over documents. My eyes burn from reading fine print. But for the first time since this began, I feel truly prepared. We have everything we need, Harlan says, closing the last folder. It's time to take control. I gather my coat, suddenly aware of how much has changed in just a few days. The woman who trembled when Victoria handed her that envelope seems like a stranger now. This isn't just about me anymore. I say, more to myself than to Harlan. It never was. Mrs. Jenkins is waiting on her porch when I arrive home. Her silver hair glows under the porch light. Her hands cradle her favorite teapot. Margaret knew this day would come, she says as I climb the steps. You're ready? The calm certainty in her voice washes over me. The weight of Grandma Margaret's preparation, Harlan's strategic guidance, and Mrs. Jenkins' wavering support steadies me like bedrock beneath my feet. On Monday, Victoria will discover what happens when silence becomes strength. I tap my pen against the stack of tenant applications, but the steady rhythm fails to calm my nerves. The morning sun streams through my apartment windows, highlighting dust motes dancing in the air. 3 days of relative peace since our confrontation at my parents' home. 3 days of believing I had finally taken control. My phone vibrates against the coffee table. Harlan's name flashes across the screen. My stomach tightens as I answer. Amanda, Victoria just filed an emergency motion with the county court. His voice carries a tension I haven't heard before. She's challenging the LLC formation, claiming Margaret was mentally compromised when she transferred you. My coffee turns bitter on my tongue. That's absurd. Grandma was sharp until the very end. It's a sophisticated strategy, Harlan says. She's questioning Margaret's mental capacity during the exact period when the paperwork was filed. If the judge grants even temporary relief, you could lose control of everything while this drags through the courts. I press my forehead against the cool window glass. How bad is this? The Gazette printed an interview with her this morning. She's portraying herself as the victim, claiming she's only trying to protect the family assets from Margaret's misguided decision. I close my eyes. Let me guess. Mom and Dad are backing her up. Front page photo of all 3 of them looking appropriately concerned. Your father was quoted saying they just want what's best for both our daughters. Harlan's disgust is barely contained. Victoria scheduled a press conference for tomorrow afternoon to explain the situation to the community. The familiar pattern of my heart beating too fast begins. Breathe in, breathe out. What happens next? Judge Whitaker set an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Everything we've built could be undone with a single ruling. I grab my laptop, hands shaking slightly as I open my email. The court notice sits at the top of my inbox. The legal language, cold and formal. Victoria called me last night, I tell Harlan. Said she's protected this family for years while I did nothing. Said it was time I stopped playing games. This isn't a game, Harlan says. It's a desperate move from someone who's realized she's vulnerable. A knock at my door interrupts us. I peer through the peephole to find my parents standing in the hallway. My father's face bears the stern expression I've known since childhood. I need to go, I tell Harlan. My parents are here. Remember, he says quickly before I hang up. Everything we prepared for is happening now. Stay focused. Another knot rebut. I take a deep breath and open the door. Amanda, my father says. Not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside, my mother follows, her eyes scanning my living room with the familiar mix of judgment and disappointment. This has gone far enough. What has? I ask, keeping my voice steady. This childish rebellion, my mother says. Victoria has managed the family properties for years. She knows what she's doing. Just let your sister handle it, she always has. The words sting with their familiar dismissal. I notice my father glancing at the folder on my coffee table labeled Brookside Financial Records, 2022-2024. Several neighbors stopped me at the grocery store yesterday. My mother adds, they're questioning if you're being fair to your sister. Think about how this looks. The implicit threat hangs in the air. Community pressure, public shaming, the weight of appearances, the same tools they've used my entire life. I have an emergency hearing tomorrow morning. I say, not engaging with their manipulation. I need to prepare. My father places his hand on my shoulder. His cologne smells of cedar and disappointment. Amanda, be reasonable. Your sister has connections, resources. This will only end badly for you. When they finally leave, promising to pray, I come to my senses. I collapse onto my couch. My phone buzzes again. A message from Mrs. Jenkins. Come down for tea when you're ready. I heard everything. 20 minutes later, I'm seated at Mrs. Jenkins' kitchen table, surrounded by photographs of her grandchildren and the faint scent of cinnamon. She pours tea from her mother's floral pot while I outline Victoria's legal strategy. Margaret anticipated this, Mrs. Jenkins says, pushing a plate of shortbread cookies toward me. That's why she had you keep such detailed records of every repair, every conversation. Harlan says we have everything we need. I say, but Victoria's entire career is built on winning cases like this. Mrs. Jenkins squeezes my hand. I've already called 12 tenants, who've lived here more than 5 years. They'll all be at the courthouse tomorrow morning. Character witnesses for Margaret's mental state. My phone lights up with a text from Harlan. Countermotion filed. Judge Whitaker requested all financial records for the past 48 months. Remember what Margaret always said, patience wins more than power. I've spent my whole life being patient, I say, setting down my teacup. It hasn't exactly worked out well for me. Mrs. Jenkins studies me over her glasses. There's a difference between waiting passively and preparing strategically. Margaret taught you the difference. That's why she chose you, not Victoria. By evening, my living room has transformed into a command center. Harlan arrived with boxes of financial records and court precedents. 3 other tenants have stopped by with written statements about their interactions with Margaret in her final years. Victoria will argue undue influence, Harlan explains, organizing papers into precise stacks. She claimed Margaret was susceptible to manipulation due to age and isolation. She portrays you as opportunistic. That's exactly what she is, Mrs. Jenkins mutters. The judge needs to see the pattern, I say, spreading out maintenance requests, spanning 5 years. Show how Victoria systematically neglected repairs while pocketing the funds. Show how Margaret documented everything. My phone rings again. My parents. I silence it without answering. Tomorrow will determine everything, Harlan says, checking his watch. We should review your testimony again. Near midnight, long after Harlan has gone home to prepare his arguments, Mrs. Jenkins insists on staying. She sits on my couch, needlework in her hands, the gentle click of her knitting needles a soothing counterpoint to my anxiety. You need sleep, she says gently. Tomorrow we will show them what real family means. I nod, but instead of heading to my bedroom, I pull out an old photobium from my bookshelf. The leather cover is worn smooth from years of handling. I find the picture I'm looking for, Margaret and me on the building rooftop, watching a sunset. I was 10, gangly and serious. She had her arm around my shoulders. I knew even then, Mrs. Jenkins says, looking over my shoulder. Margaret built this case for 3 years before she passed. Every document, every witness statement, every financial record. She knew exactly what Victoria would do. I'm not just fighting for myself anymore, I whisper, tracing Margaret's face in the photograph. It's for Mrs. Thompson, who can't afford to move. For Mr. Rodriguez and his grandson. For everyone Victoria would discard for profit. Mrs. Jenkins sets aside her knitting. Margaret always said you understood what mattered most about Brookside, that it's not just property, it's people's homes. I place the photograph on top of my court documents. I hope I make you proud tomorrow, Grandma. Outside my window, the city lights twinkle against the darkness. Tomorrow morning, Judge Whitaker will hear both sides. Tomorrow, everything changes, one way or another. I take a deep breath and begin reviewing my testimony one last time. The following morning, I grip the edge of the wooden table, knuckles turning white, as Judge Whitaker adjusts her glasses. The courtroom buzzes with anticipation, every seat filled, a sea of faces from Brookside residences. Mrs. Thompson with her cane, the Millers holding hands in the 3rd row, Mr. Rodriguez with his weathered face, set in determination. Victoria sits across the aisle, spine rigid in her charcoal suit. Her attorney shuffles papers with practiced efficiency. My parents occupy the row directly behind her. My father's arm draped protectively around my mother's shoulders. They haven't looked at me once. Mrs. Jenkins reaches over and pats my hand. Breathe, dear. Richard Harlan arranges his notes methodically beside me. Remember what we discussed. Let the evidence speak. The bailiff calls the court to order, and Judge Whitaker begins. This is an emergency hearing regarding ownership and management rights of Brookside residences. I understand there are time-sensitive matters at stake. Victoria's attorney stands, Michael Donovan from her firm's litigation department. His voice fills the courtroom, measured and authoritative. Your Honor, we contend that Riverbrook Properties LLC was formed under questionable circumstances. Mrs. Margaret Wells was 80 and suffering from declining health when these documents were executed. We have medical records indicating she was taking prescription medications that could impair judgment. He presents documents to the court with flourish. Furthermore, Amanda Wells has limited business experience and no legal training. Her grandmother was clearly subject to undue influence during a vulnerable period. My stomach knots. They're attacking Grandma Margaret's mental capacity, something so precious to her. I breathe slowly, remembering her voice. Patience outlasts power. Donovan continues. The Wells family has managed these properties for decades. Victoria Wells Harrison has the professional expertise to maximize returns for all concerned parties. My father nods emphatically behind Victoria. My mother dabs at her eyes with a tissue. Financial records indicate Mrs. Wells Harrison has increased property values by 23% through professional management. This last-minute claim by Amanda Wells threatens the financial security of the entire family. Judge Whitaker turns to Harlan. Your response? Counselor. Harlan rises slowly, deliberately. His movements are measured, but his voice remains commanding. Your Honor, I served as Margaret Wells's attorney for 34 years. I was present when Riverbrook Properties was formed and when Margaret Wells transferred ownership of Brookside Residences to that LLC. He lifts a video tablet. Rather than tell you about Margaret's mental capacity, I'd like her to speak for herself. The courtroom stills as Harlan connects the tablet to the display screen. Margaret appears, seated in her living room, date stamp showing 3 weeks before she passed. I, Margaret Marie Wells, being of sound mind and body, make this statement freely and without coercion. Her voice, though softer than in her prime, carries the same clarity and purpose always remembered. I wish to explain my decision regarding Brookside Residences. She adjusts her glasses, the same gesture Judge Whitaker made minutes earlier. I built this property 52 years ago with my husband, Charles. For decades, it has provided homes for working families and seniors on fixed incomes. My granddaughter Amanda has demonstrated the commitment to continue this legacy. A tear escapes despite my determination to remain composed. Mrs. Jenkins squeezes my hand. Margaret continues. I am transferring ownership to Riverbrook Properties, LLC, which Amanda will. I do this with full awareness of my actions and their consequences. The video continues with Margaret answering questions from Harlan about her decision. Her answers lucid and detailed. When it ends, the courtroom remains silent. Harlan produces a thick binder. We have documentation of Margaret Wells' medical evaluations showing her cognitive functions remained excellent until her passing. Her physician, Dr. Susan Reynolds, is present to testify if needed. He turns to another exhibit. We also have comprehensive records of building management under Victoria Wells Harrison for the past 3 years. Financial statements show $83,000 earmarked for building maintenance that was diverted to other accounts. A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Victoria shifts in her seat. These documents, Harlan continues, sliding another folder toward the judge, show critical repairs repeatedly postponed despite tenant complaints. Mrs. Ruth Jenkins has collected statements from 17 tenants regarding deteriorating conditions under Mrs. Wells Harrison's management. Mrs. Jenkins rises. Clutching a folder of her own at 70, she stands with surprising strength. Your Honor, I've lived at Brookside for 40 years. I knew Margaret Wells as both landlord and friend. She trusted Amanda to preserve affordable housing for families and seniors. Under Victoria's management, our heat failed twice last winter. 3 elderly tenants developed respiratory infections. Victoria whispers urgently to Donovan, who looks increasingly uncomfortable. Judge Whitaker reviews the documents, her expression unreadable. I'd like to hear from Miss Wells directly. My pulse quickens as I stand. The walk to the witness stand feels endless. After I'm sworn in, the judge asks, Why do you believe you should maintain control of Brookside residences? I look at Victoria, then at my parents, before turning back to the judge. I'm not trying to punish anyone, Your Honor. I'm trying to protect what my grandmother built. Brookside isn't just an asset to be maximized. It's a community where people have lived for decades. Miss Wells Harrison claims you lack the business acumen to manage such a property effectively, the judge notes. I've been managing it for 5 years, Your Honor. First assisting my grandmother, then running daily operations while Victoria handled financial matters. The tenants know me. I know which radiator knocks in winter and which doors stick in summer humidity. The questioning continues for nearly an hour. Donovan cross-examines me about financial matters, trying to expose gaps in my knowledge. But Grandma Margaret and Harlan prepared me well. For each question, I have records, figures, and plans ready. When testimony concludes, Judge Whitaker calls for closing arguments. Donovan emphasizes Victoria's professional qualifications and the family's long-standing Harlan counters with Margaret's clear intentions and documentation of mismanagement. The courtroom falls silent as Judge Whitaker reviews her notes. Victoria maintains her composed expression, but her fingers tap rhythmically against her leather portfolio, a nervous habit from childhood. Finally, Judge Whitaker looks up. Having reviewed the evidence presented today, I find the formation of Riverbrook Properties, LLC and the subsequent property transfer were executed properly by Margaret Wells, while she was fully competent to make such decisions. A soft exhale escapes from Mrs. Jenkins beside me. Furthermore, the financial records presented show management practices that are, at best, professionally questionable. The judge's gaze settles briefly on Victoria. This court upholds Amanda Wells' ownership and management rights to Brookside residences through Riverbrook Properties LLC. Relief floods through me, warm and overwhelming. Harlan places a steadying hand on my shoulder. Additionally, Judge Whitaker continues. The court orders a full accounting of all Brookside residences' finances during Victoria Wells Harrison's management period. Any misappropriated maintenance funds must be repaid to Riverbrook Properties within 60 days. Victoria's composure finally cracks. Her shoulders slump slightly, though she maintains her rigid posture. Any further interference with Riverbrook Properties operations will result in additional sanctions. Judge Whitaker concludes. This matter is decided. The gavel strikes with finality. The sound reverberates through the courtroom, through my chest. Thank you, Your Honor, I say, voice steady despite the emotion swelling inside me, as people rise. A gentleman in a dark suit approaches Donovan, handing him a business card. I catch the words bar association before Harlan guides me toward the exit. Mrs. Jenkins embraces me, tears in her eyes. She's watching over you. Dear Margaret would be so proud. Tenants surround us, offering congratulations. Mr. Rodriguez pumps my hand enthusiastically. Mrs. Thompson taps her cane on the floor in approval. All these years of documentation just paid off, Harlan says, satisfaction evident in his voice. Margaret knew exactly what she was doing. I turned to see my parents standing awkwardly at the periphery of the celebration. My mother's expression wavers between confusion and dismay. My father stares at the floor. Behind them, Victoria confers with Donovan, her face carefully blank despite the defeat. For a moment, I consider approaching them with words of reconciliation. Instead, I turn back to the community gathered around me, the people who trusted me, supported me, believed in me when my own family wouldn't. This was never about revenge. I tell Mrs. Jenkins, quietly it was about the truth. She nods, understanding in her eyes. The truth has a way of setting everything right in the end. Outside the courthouse, sunshine breaks through clouds that threatened rain all morning. The light feels symbolic, warming my face as I descend the steps with my real family, the one Grandma Margaret helped me find. I stand in the renovated community room of Brookside Residences, watching Mrs. Jenkins arrange flowers on the buffet table. The morning light streams through new, energy-efficient windows, highlighting the freshly painted walls in warm sandstone. 6 months since the court victory, and sometimes I still wake up expecting to find it was all a dream. Amanda, where do you want the punch bowl? Asks Mrs. Jenkins, now officially our resident liaison. Her silver hair catches the light. Turns. Next to the cookies, I answer, adjusting the commemorative plaque we're unveiling today. My fingers trace the engraved words. Margaret Wells Community Room, where neighbors become family. Mr. Rodriguez from 3B enters carrying a homemade cake. Just like I promised, he says, my mother's recipe to celebrate our new heating system. My phone buzzes with a message from Richard Harlan, now permanent legal counsel for Riverbrook. Court denied Victoria's final appeal. Congratulations, this chapter is officially closed. A weight lifts from my shoulders. Victoria's law firm placed her on leave after the trial revealed her financial manipulations. Last I heard, she took a position at a smaller firm across town. The phone rings again. My parents. After months of awkward conversations, they've slowly begun to acknowledge what happened. We're running late, my mother says, her voice carrying that new hesitancy. Your father wanted to bring those photo albums you asked about. As I set down the phone, Mrs. Jenkins appears at my elbow. You never wanted to fight, she observes quietly. You just wanted fairness. I never thought I'd win, I admit, straightening brochures for our tenant assistance program. She squeezes my hand. Margaret knew you would. That's why she left you everything you needed. I nod, remembering Grandma's whispered words, years ago. Your sister seeks power. You seek connection. Remember which one builds a legacy. The morning sun shifts, illuminating the community room. 6 months later, I stand confidently before the contractor team, reviewing renovation plans for the East Wing. My posture is straight, voice steady as I question a proposed materials change. The specifications call for commercial-grade flooring in the hallways, I say, pointing to the blueprints. This alternative won't hold up to daily traffic. The lead contractor, who initially addressed his comments to my male assistant, now meets Maya's directly. You're right, Ms. Wells. We'll stick with the original plan. Later that morning, I take my coffee to the balcony of my new apartment, the building manager's suite where Grandma Margaret once lived. From here, I can see the small garden where Mrs. Thompson tends tomatoes. While chatting with a young mother who moved in last month, the waiting list for apartments now stretches to 37 names. Despite real estate pressure, I've maintained rents at affordable levels while steadily improving the building. My phone rings. Sophia, a young property manager who's been shadowing me. The bank approved the Hawkins family for the payment plan. She reports, just like you suggested. Excellent, I reply. Remember what I told you. A building is bricks. A community is people. She finishes in the afternoon. Mrs. Jenkins finds me reviewing applications for our housing assistance program. You're not just maintaining a building, she says, settling into the chair across from my desk. You're building a home. Margaret would be proud. Through my window, I spot Victoria's car pulling up to the curb. Her designer clothes replaced with something more subdued, her posture less commanding. Our eyes meet briefly before she continues down the street. Perhaps there's a lesson learned in that glance. The seasons turn, bringing us to 1 year after the court victory. I sit across from Robert Caldwell, a widower facing eviction after medical bills depleted his. My landlord says business is business, he explains. Shoulders slumped. The phrase triggers a memory. Victoria, delivering my eviction notice with those exact words. I study his modest pension that barely covers essentials. Brookside has a flexible payment plan for residents in transition. I tell him, we can work with your income and adjust as your situation improves. Hope flickers across his face. I don't understand. Every other place turned me away. Brookside operates differently, I explain. My grandmother taught me that property isn't just an asset on a balance sheet. That evening, during our monthly community gathering, I watched 3 families who might otherwise be homeless share a meal in our community room. The Margaret Wells Community Fund, now directed by Mrs. Jenkins, has helped 17 households find stable housing this year. Property owners from neighboring buildings mingle with tenants interested in our model. Your grandmother's vision is spreading, Mrs. Jenkins whispers. Compassionate housing with dignity. My parents stand near the dessert table, tentatively engaging with tenants they'd once dismissed. Our relationship remains formal, but the rigid silence between us has softened into something that might with time. As the gathering winds down, I climb to the rooftop garden. The sunset bathes the neighborhood in amber light, highlighting the small improvements that have transformed Brookside. Grandma Margaret's voice seems to whisper on the evening breeze. Power without compassion is just control. I take a deep breath, at peace with my choices. When people show you who they are, believe them, but leave room for them to become better. That's the true legacy Grandma Margaret left me, more valuable than any property deed.